So let's talk a little bit about hormones. How do you parse through that with your patients and why they're in a state of hormonal disruption in the first place?
Yeah, it's never just one thing. You could look at things like poor nutrition and the quality of our foods has deteriorated, increased stress, which drives our cortisol stress hormone, which causes a lot of other downstream consequences. We have a sedentary lifestyle, lack of fitness, lack of activity. All of that is true, yes. And one of the biggest factors that I don't think is really emphasized enough are the toxins in our food, the toxins in our water, the toxins in our personal care products that we are now seeing in the literature are crushing our hormones. What's even scarier is that our grandfathers were exposed to toxins. It's been shown to affect their sperm, which is then being passed down to our fathers, being passed down to us, and then we're passing it down to our children as well.
I want to really focus in on what your expertise is in. And I know you're an expert at many things, but you've written books, and one of them's right here, Male 2.0, about hormones, right? And so tell me a little bit about your expertise and how you got to this place in the first place.
Sure, thanks so much. So I spent 23 years in urology as a board certified urologist doing robotic surgery. I launched the robotics program in my hometown back in Sarasota, Florida, on the cutting edge of advanced prostate cancer detection and minimally invasive treatment. And I love to be on the cutting edge as a pioneer in the men's health field. And as I went through my career in urology, I got very frustrated, disillusioned with how I had, first of all, so little time with men, again, 6 minutes per visit, and we were not really solving anything. And it was, great at fixing acute care. If you have prostate cancer, you have a kidney stone, if you need a vasectomy, I can do that. But if a guy comes to me and says, I want to have more energy, I want to feel like a man again, I want to be able to think clear and be more focused and be more productive and get rid of my belly fat and have great sex with my wife and play on the ground with my kids, I wasn't doing anything for them. And I realized that my own health challenges made me suddenly aware of that when I was struggling and I was 30 pounds overweight and I went to a doctor for my first physical ever and I was a mess. And I realized that I didn't have the solutions. And so I went back to school and I spent about 10 years studying and learning and engaging in, how to do hormones the right way. Functional medicine, genetics, epigenetics, the science of lifestyle and how our behaviors affect everything. And how can you interlay peptides and use wearable technology and really this cutting edge of longevity that you and I are engrossed in right now. It's this amazing world of optimization that we can actually be our absolute best again with the right tools and strategies. And I realized that our healthcare system stinks at giving people what they really want and need. And so after many years of planning and preparing and some procrastinating, I made the massive decision and I jumped off this figurative cliff and I left traditional healthcare. I left my practice, started from scratch, and I built the Gapin Institute. Yeah. And that was about 4 or 5 years ago now, and we are growing and we are focused on how do we help men, and men's health is my passion and focus, although we work with women as well, but men's health is where I live. How can I help men optimize their bodies to work like they're supposed to? How can I help them to really, achieve peak performance and be able to live their best life? And guys say, God, I used to feel great. I used to do this. I used to that. Well, that's what I'm going to help you do. And, every guy thinks of high performance differently. Some guys is, I want to be able to crush it in my business. And I want to be able to scale and have this massive exit. And other guys, I want to be a leader in my community. Other guys, high performance means I can show up in the bedroom for my wife at night and be able to perform and be a loving partner. Others, it's like for myself, it's I want to be the best father I can be. And that's what it's all about for me is I have these 2 beautiful kids at home. I have an amazing wife. And how can I be the present and engaged husband, father, and leader for them that I need to be, that I want to be? And so that's really the foundation. That's my purpose. That's my why. And so I bring that into everything I do when I work with men. And to do that, it takes a very different approach than what our crappy healthcare system is giving. And it takes, we talked about lifestyle stuff, nutrition and fitness and sleep. It takes optimizing hormones and doing the advanced diagnostic testing. I know that we've talked about this a lot, how important it is to find those blind spots that are getting in the way and holding you back. And how can you take a very integrated approach and coming at it very holistically.
Yeah. I love what you said about starting with the why. You talked about that and you gave a few examples of some whys that men and, women too would have to do this. And I find that that's so powerful with my patients. It's like, I don't even like before I do a health history, I say, why are you here? Like, what do you want to achieve? Right. And they'll start talking about like, I need to lose some weight. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't feel like my testosterone is good, but I'm like,
Right.
what's the real, like, why do you want to get healthy? And when you really frame it that way, it gets emotional sometimes. Right.
Yeah.
And
I love that. I love that you bring this up because
Yeah.
there's the why and then there's the why behind the why.
yeah.
And I'll give you a great story. One of my clients came to us about 3 or 4 months ago, and he's older. He's in his mid to late 60s, older than the typical guy we tend to see come in. But his main thing was cognitive function and focus. I want a better focus. Okay. And it took a little bit of pulling out of him, but what I finally come to find out was that a few years ago, he was a very competitive bridge player, and he was winning tournaments. And suddenly he found that his mind was deteriorating. He couldn't compete anymore. And that's all he cared about was that. And so for him, great example of it's not enough to help him think better and clearer. I got to help him get back to playing competitive bridge.
Sure.
And that means there's a lot more to it than just thinking clear. It's the focus, it's the energy, it's the concentration, it's the mental acuity, all the details that make it so much more important. You bring up the weight loss thing. Guys will say, yeah, I want to lose 20 pounds. Well, why? Well, so I can fit my jeans. No, why? Why do you want that? And a lot of it may come down to they want to feel like a man again. They want to feel that their spouse is attracted to them. They want to feel powerful again. There's often an underlying emotional component that we have to get to. It's not just about the numbers. It's about the human behind the numbers.
Yeah. It's so great to be at this point, like away from Western medicine. We never even got to ask a person why, because you had, like you said, 6 minutes. And now to have the time to spend with people and ask them the why behind the why behind that why.
Right.
And really, because I think that's so powerful for anyone listening to this is like, why are you listening to this podcast in the first place, right? And getting to that and getting really clear on that just makes it so much easier to focus in on that goal, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. So let's talk a little bit about hormones. And one of the struggles I have explaining to patients about hormones is I think a lot of people feel that the problems are starting with hormone deficiencies versus their routines and habits are probably a reason that they're in this hormonal state in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I know you and I talked about this in the past too. And I just was wondering, like, how do you like parse through that with your patients and why they're in a state of hormonal disruption in the first place?
Yeah, great question. And this brings back the point of having a very integrated understanding and approach to this because it's never just one thing, right? So when we see a man come in the office who has low testosterone, the question always is, well, why? And you could look at things like poor nutrition and the quality of our foods has deteriorated, increased stress, which drives our cortisol stress hormone, which causes a lot of other downstream consequences. We have a sedentary lifestyle, lack of fitness, lack of activity. All of that is true, yes. And one of the biggest factors that I don't think is really emphasized enough are the toxins in our food. The toxins in our water, the toxins in our personal care products that we are now seeing in the literature are crushing our hormones. What's even scarier is it has a transgenerational effect. What I mean by that big word is that our grandfathers were exposed to toxins. It's been shown to affect their sperm, which is then being passed down to our fathers, being passed down to us, and then we're passing it down to our children as well.
So you're saying the toxins that I'm exposed to right now, it causes genetic, epigenetic changes that gets passed on to future generations.
Absolutely correct. That's right. And so a lot of the damage that we're seeing, unfortunately, the damage has already been done, so to speak. And I'm seeing men in their 20s and 30s coming in who have testosterone levels half of what they should be. And there are 3 great longitudinal studies from the US and Europe that have shown that worldwide we're seeing testosterone levels about half what they were 20, 30 years ago. And it's dropping by about 1% every year continually. And it's because of that compounding effect that
through the generations.
Through generations.
Wow. Yeah, I was wondering, like, why is this happening? And you're right, like it's all these reasons, right? And not enough movement, poor dietary choices, et cetera, but it's actually being passed down generation. So this is a compounding effect generation to generation.
Right. That's right.
So for our kids' sake, we got to fix our testosterone.
Yeah, it's about cleaning up our food, cleaning up our water, and it comes back to these lifestyle choices that are so important. But I think that the point to emphasize here is a lot of people want to fix the testosterone problem by just by just focusing on strength training and nutrition and sleep. And there's a lot more to it than that, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So on that, let's say man comes into you and he's experiencing symptoms of low. Well, first of all, why don't we go into what are some of the symptoms of low testosterone? How would a listener know maybe testosterone is the issue?
So some of the most common complaints men will have with low testosterone will be low energy, fatigue. Later in the day, it's 3 or 4 o'clock, and they want to take a nap. That's not normal. That's not okay. That's not optimized, man. If you're wanting to take a nap, your focus isn't like it used to be. You can't concentrate. You have brain fog. You can't quite come up with the word, or memory is off. Mood is off. A lot of men talk about just a lack of drive with low testosterone. They're moody. They're irritable. Belly fat. A lot of guys will carry like those last 5, 10, 15 pounds of belly fat that they can't shake no matter how hard they're working out in the gym and trying to lose weight. They can't build muscle like they used to. Can't recover, suffer from a knee injury, an elbow injury from tennis, and you just can't shake it. It's not healing like you used to. Poor sleep, loss of sex drive, poor function in the bedroom. I've had couples come in and the wife will say something's wrong with my husband because he used to chase me around the house and I had to, bat him off with a stick. And now I'm chasing him because he doesn't seem interested anymore. And some wives even think their men are cheating on them because they have just a lack of drive and they don't care about sex and they're different. And so it changes. Sometimes it's very subtle over years. It changes in men that sometimes the wife will see it before the man can appreciate it. But what's important to recognize is that a lot of men have no symptoms at all. I have friends, colleagues, other doctors who come to me asking me, how do I deal with all this stuff? How do I correct all this stuff? And they'll say, yeah, I feel fine, but people keep telling me I should check my testosterone. I'll be like, yeah, this is why, because a lot of men have no symptoms, and they'll check it, and it's in the tank, and they're like, I thought I was doing great. What do you mean? And so I want to emphasize that even if a man does not have any symptoms at all, they should get tested because you'd be surprised how low levels are.
And what age should someone start testing their testosterone?
I would say in your 30s. I've had
Great.
so many men in their 30s, and we'll talk about free versus total, but their levels were in the tank, and they did not even recognize that there was a problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of times men will compensate for it until it reaches a critical threshold where suddenly they realize, holy cow, I need help.
Yeah. So I know you treat mainly men, but you also have some women in your practice.
We do.
What are some, and testosterone, I try to emphasize the women patient I see is just as important for women as it is for men.
Yeah.
So can you touch on that a little bit and what
sure.
symptoms women would possibly experience?
Yeah, and a lot of the wives will say, well, what about me? The
Yeah.
men will come in, and so we definitely, we work with a lot of women as well, and hormones are so important. And I'm glad you bring this up because testosterone is an incredibly important hormone for women as well, and it's underappreciated. It's important for, again, energy, for sex drive, for building muscle, and especially, premenopausal women in their 30s and 40s. A lot of them will have low testosterone, and they're struggling to optimize. They're struggling to burn the belly fat, the fat around the belly, or the buttocks and the thighs. They're trying hard to lose weight, if you will. You can't spot treat fat.
No.
But a lot of it is their metabolism is off, and that comes back to hormones, and testosterone is so important. The other point to recognize is estrogen, which women think of as their main hormone, is metabolized from, broken down from testosterone. And so you need optimized testosterone. A lot of couples will come in and the woman has no sex drive at all, and the man, now that he's been optimized, there's this disconnect, and a lot of times that's testosterone deficiency in the woman as well. So important for women. There's a lot of cardiovascular health benefits to optimizing testosterone in men and women as well, and so the earlier you start with that, the better.
And I'm glad you brought that up because my next question to you was actually definitely low testosterone can cause symptoms, but even if you don't have symptoms, it's important to get checked. And this is why, I'm a big fan of biomarker testing. I tell everyone when you're 30, even earlier if you want, is get a set of biomarkers done. Because if we know what your testosterone level was in your late 20s, we can optimize towards that number later on in life, right? So really important to get biomarker testing done as early as you can. But secondly, even if you're asymptomatic, there's a disease risk that is compounding year over year by having low testosterone, right? So can you talk about that for men and women as well?
For sure. So we know without question the number one cause of death in the U.S. is cardiovascular disease,
Right.
right? Cardiovascular disease in men and women is the most common cause of mortality. But what's important to recognize is that doesn't start when you're 50 or 60. That actually starts when you're a child, and it's a process that develops over years and decades of time with plaque formation in the coronary vessels and the arteries that go to your heart. And that's dramatically affected by testosterone. So this is really a critically important point. I'm glad you're bringing this up because we know that testosterone, low testosterone, is very clearly associated with increased risk of major adverse cardiac events, heart attack, stroke, sudden death. We know that low testosterone is associated with worsened lipid numbers. Let me repeat that. Low testosterone is associated with worsened lipid numbers, LDL, triglycerides. Those numbers are much worse in men with low testosterone, women as well. And so it's so important that we correct that testosterone deficiency as soon as possible because it has a lot of downstream effects on cardiovascular health, lipids. It affects blood sugar regulation. It affects inflammation. It affects cortisol, stress hormone levels. It affects so many downstream parts of our system, of our physiology. You have to optimize that first.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier too, you said low testosterone causes brain fog, but over years there's a higher association with Alzheimer's disease as well. So all of these symptoms kind of pile up over time and then become disease. So, maybe you're unable to lose some belly fat, but that becomes metabolic disease 20 years later. And so it's important to get to this early.
Absolutely. And this is really, I want to emphasize, I love what you just said. This emphasizes what's wrong with traditional healthcare. Our healthcare system is all around, when you have a heart attack, you're going to go to the hospital, then you're finally going to get treated. Or else your doctor may check your lipids. Oh, you have high LDL, here's your statin, and that's it. Right. And so taking a very proactive, intentional, personalized approach as early as you can is so important. And that's where our healthcare system is completely failing.
Completely backwards.
Absolutely.
Just wait till you're
reactive.
in disease and reactive.
Right.
Exactly. So, all right. So you've convinced everyone to get their biomarkers tested, late 30s, maybe even early 20s. What tests are you doing, like the specific tests you're doing on men and women to check?
So when we start working with clients, we have a huge biomarker panel that we look at, advanced diagnostics panel. It has over 100 biomarkers to start. This is just the blood testing. Haven't even gotten to the functional stuff that we'll talk about. And this panel is going to look at all the hormones. So, we're going to talk all about testosterone, but I want to just emphasize we have over 50 hormones in our body, right? And so many men focus on just T. And T is important, but you also have, again, over 50 other hormones that we want to look at. So we're looking at all the hormones. We're looking at markers of inflammation. We're looking at micronutrient levels. We're looking at markers of blood sugar regulation, markers of liver function, markers of advanced lipid function. And all of these markers are telling us a lot of different things that are important. And I call these blind spots with your health. And a great story I like to talk about, Bob Harper. Bob Harper, he is on the TV show The Biggest Loser. He's that lead fitness trainer, right? Yeah. And he looks great. He's like the epitome of good health, and we all aspire to look like Bob Harper, right? And he's teaching people how to lose weight and get healthy. A couple of years ago, at the age of 51, Bob Harper had a heart attack that almost killed him.
I remember that.
Right? It was in the news. And fortunately, he recovered. And what he found afterwards were there were blind spots in his health that he didn't even realize were causing major problems just under the surface. He thought he was doing everything right, but yet he wasn't. And that's where the diagnostics are so important. For him, it was Lp(a), lipoprotein A, which is a subtype of LDL. It's a specific LDL fragment that is inherited from your parents and has a dramatic effect on your risk of cardiovascular disease. And you would never know it unless you actually test it.
No, and traditional healthcare doesn't test for that until it's too late. And
that's right.
We test an Lp(a) on everybody because what I tell people is Lp(a), you get it done once, even if you're 30, and you know if it's high.
For life.
And then for life. It's like one of those and I think it's like 18 to 20% of people have Lp(a). Like it's crazy how many people have this.
That's right.
And no one's ever tested for it with the traditional cholesterol panel.
That's right. And a statin doesn't treat that.
It doesn't treat it.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. So on the hormone front, you're testing testosterone, free testosterone.
Yep.
You're testing estrogen and progesterone, estrogen in men and women. Right?
Absolutely.
Progesterone in women. What other hormones are you checking? DHEA?
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that for estrogen, a lot of men try to get their estrogen as low as they can. And, I like to say estrogen is not the enemy.
Right.
And we need estrogen. And a lot of the benefits of testosterone are in reality due to the trickle-down effect. Again, testosterone gets broken down into estrogen. And a lot of the cognitive benefits you were mentioning are probably from estrogen. A lot of the cardiovascular benefits are likely from estrogen. So looking at estrogen levels, nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a key hormone that is something that most doctors don't check or even know about, but it's a hormone that regulates our blood vessels, and it's responsible for vasodilation, improving blood flow, right? When you work out, you want to improve blood flow to your muscles. When you're in the bedroom, you want improved blood flow down there. When you need to think and have focus and cognitive, clarity, crystal clear clarity when you're thinking and concentration, memory, et cetera, you want blood flow to the brain. Nitric oxide is in large part responsible for that. And so we can test for nitric oxide, and there are ways that we can help improve that as well.
What tests are you using for nitric oxide?
So it's actually a saliva
the
test
saliva
strip.
test,
Exactly, yeah. Looking at thyroid. Most people think that thyroid is just important for women, but it's important for men as well. And it's important because it regulates mood and energy and metabolism. It controls your gut. And a lot of men struggle with something that they won't admit, and that is stress, right? High cortisol stress, and it may be from stress of finances or marital issues or the kids or your business, whatever. Or some guys will refuse to admit stress, but we're all dealing with stress, right? Our hormones, thyroid and DHEA, another hormone, are responsible for regulating and balancing out cortisol, stress hormone levels. And so thyroid is so important. It's also responsible for our gut health as well. And so for a lot of reasons, we want to be looking at thyroid hormone in men that is not just important in women.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
Yeah.
With the cortisol testing, are you doing saliva testing for cortisol 4 times a day kind of a thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So when we look at, the second step of my process, the deep dive part of it is looking at advanced testing like cortisol. And a lot of high-performing entrepreneurs and founders I work with, they'll say like, yeah, I'm not stressed. I'm fine. I'm good. I compensate. But when you test for it, again, when you show them the data, and a cortisol test is a great way to do that, just 4 saliva samples throughout the day, you can see how that is really coming out, and you'll find that typically cortisol levels are much, much higher than guys are thinking they are.
Yeah. So, and what I tell all my patients is that, if you live in a chronically high state of cortisol, your body resets and thinks that's normal. So the next time you're stressed, it goes even higher and higher. And so it's really important to kind of cut out that stress cycle on a frequent basis. So let's focus back in on testosterone. Could you kind of explain the difference between free testosterone and testosterone, if you don't mind?
Sure. Yeah. So great question. A lot of doctors will only look at total testosterone. And I want to emphasize that that's a fairly worthless number. Because for testosterone to do its job, for it to have any physiologic effect, first to understand that it has to get into the cell, right? It has to get into the cell. It then binds to an androgen receptor, gets into the nucleus, and does all kinds of fun stuff in the nucleus, in the headquarters, the brains of a cell. That's muscle cell, brain cell, et cetera. For the testosterone molecule to get into a cell, it can't be stuck to other big fluffy proteins. It has to be free floating, has to be small enough molecule to fit through the doorway of a cell. 99% of our testosterone, 99% of it, is bound to proteins in our bloodstream, like SHBG and other proteins you may have heard about. Once it's bound to these proteins, it's worthless. It is ineffective. It cannot get through the doorway. It's this big fluffy molecule now. It can't fit through the doorway, through the opening of a cell wall. It can't bind to the androgen receptor. It can't do anything downstream that we want it to do. It's worthless. So the only testosterone that matters is free testosterone. So free T is simply the amount of testosterone that is not bound to proteins in the bloodstream that's actually able to have any physiologic effect.
Yeah, that's such an important point, because if a lot of people, they're going online and getting these test kits with free testosterone and getting testosterone mailed to them, and they have no idea what their sex hormone binding globulin is, what their free T is. And so it just emphasizes why you have to work with a trained practitioner. Oh, on that point though, okay, I want to mention something here. What do you think about, who's the trained practitioner to help you with this? And I ask that because I see a lot of men and women go to an endocrinologist, get their hormones levels tested, and tell them, what are you on testosterone for? I'm like, are you kidding me? And so talk about that.
It's maddening. And this is where our traditional healthcare system, again, it's failing miserably. Urologists, my colleagues who I spent decades working with, they would bash testosterone therapy and don't see the value of it. They don't recognize how important it is, or they would accept low levels. So let's talk about numbers real quick. I think this will drive home the point you're making.
Let's do that.
When you look at a lab slip, there's this reference range on the right side of the page, right? And people think that that's the optimal range. The scary part is doctors do as well, right? Our colleagues are urologists, general surgeons, endocrinologists who go through traditional healthcare training, they're taught that that's the normal range and that's where you want to be. Well, I mentioned earlier in our conversation that levels are plummeting by about 1% every year. They're about half what they were 20 years ago. That reference range is literally half what it was 20 years ago because that reference range is just simply the average of the population. So LabCorp will do 1 billion testosterone levels and the average becomes that reference range. And so the problem with other doctors like you're describing is they're just looking at that range, not understanding what are the optimized levels that you need. And so to answer your question, this is the 10 years of training that I went through. This is all the time, effort, sweat, blood, tears, money that I invested into learning how the heck do you do it the right way. And it's going back to school and going through training in longevity and optimization and, reimagining how we approach men's health, women's health, population health, and take a much more personalized, much more direct, proactive approach. And that's where we're going to make a real difference.
Absolutely. So getting back to the levels, so what are you aiming for in your male patients for a good testosterone level? And I know that's a loaded gun question because there's things like free testosterone, there's what your age is. So let's talk about this.
So what I tell guys is take your total and throw it away.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter because, again, the concept of free testosterone is the actual testosterone that can actually do its job, right? And so the free testosterone, my target is around 20. Okay, 20 picograms per milliliter is the unit for those of you listening. So 20 picograms per milliliter is our target. Understanding that for some men, 15, 16, 18 may be okay. For other men, they may need 25 or even 30, which most traditional healthcare doctors would cringe at and have some palpitations, chest pain thinking about that. But for some men, they need those levels that high to get the benefits that we talked about.
Yeah. And the reason some people's total testosterone does not translate accurately is because of sex hormone binding globulin and other proteins, right?
That's right.
Can you talk about SHGB a little bit and the importance of it and how you can modify that?
Yeah. So sexual hormone binding globulin is the most common protein that I was talking about, the big fluffy cloud molecules floating around the bloodstream that will bind to testosterone and make it unavailable. So most guys say, well, can I just lower my SHBG? So that means more of my testosterone is free floating and available. And I wish it were that easy, right? But sexual hormone binding globulin is affected by a lot of things. It's affected by metabolic health. It's affected by estrogen levels. It's affected by inflammation. A lot of different things can affect our SHBG levels. Unfortunately, it's tough to manipulate it. Things like boron may help a little bit. Some micronutrients may help a little bit. Improving thyroid health may help a little bit. Metabolic health is directly tied to it. So those are all really contributing factors. And this is where I want to emphasize there are a lot of biohackers out there who are relying on, these companies, these direct-to-consumer products to help them. You need to be working with an expert, a doctor like you, like me, who understands all the nuance of this because it's not as simple as just take this pill to lower my SHBG, which will then give me higher free T levels.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so for people to understand kind of the flow from total testosterone, which you can improve with things like getting better sleep, weightlifting, there's some supplements maybe that can improve total testosterone. Then you have more total testosterone, but if your sex hormone binding globulin is still off due to all the different factors you said, you're still not going to get enough free testosterone. That's why it's so important to have your free testosterone number, which you say should be somewhere around 20.
Exactly.
And once you get this hormones levels, you get the paper in front of you and you see the free testosterone is low. What's your conversation that you're having with your patients at that point?
So this reminds me of Joe. Joe is one of my clients. He runs a online reputation company. And when he first came to see me, he's like 40 pounds overweight and he looks like crap, feels like crap. And he's like, Doc, help me. And he told me how he learned online that, his free testosterone was 4, by the way. Okay. And that's very common. Most guys come in off the street, their levels are 4. My doctor buddy I mentioned who thought he was fine, his level was 6. Should be 20.
I would say 80% of the people I see, it's less than 10 for sure.
Yeah, 4 to 6 is very common. So Joe had tried all the conservative lifestyle stuff, the non-invasive, the natural approaches to boosting testosterone. He had been trying the strength training. He was trying to eat well, although he wasn't doing a good job of it. He's trying to sleep better, trying to do all these things that you read about.
I'm laughing because they see all these supplements, on late night TV or online that pop up, boost testosterone. Almost everyone that's like notices their testosterone is low, the first thing they do is go for a supplement.
A T booster.
A T booster, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the problem is honestly, those are not going to move the needle enough. Now, some guys, if you're religious about doing all this stuff, which no one is, of course, but if someone's religious about doing all the right things when it comes to lifestyle for 6 months, they may get that 4 to 6 number up to maybe 10. But again, you're only halfway there. And I find that it's an incredibly difficult job for any guy to do that religiously, consistently for 6 months and see that little of a change. And they start to lose motivation too. They start to lose drive. They're like, yeah, this isn't going to work. Instead, if we can give them testosterone so that their levels are where they need to be, now they have the motivation, they have the drive, they have the energy to say, let's freaking do this. And they're more motivated to make the lifestyle decisions that are still incredibly important for a lot of other reasons. But it's this double-edged sword. It's this yin and yang where you have to start somewhere. And so this is where the benefit of testosterone replacement therapy is so incredibly impactful by getting them toward the momentum in the right direction.
Yeah, you're so right about that. I think the main point there is you have to be working with someone that is equally focused on your lifestyle changes as your testosterone number.
That's right.
Right? They have to be a yin and yang that go together.
Yeah.
If you're just doing one, you're going. In fact, I've seen people that don't do any lifestyle changes. In fact, they go even more sedentary and they get on testosterone replacement therapy. And I've seen negative consequences to that as well.
Absolutely. And this is why, as amazing as I may be when it comes to men's health and medical treatment and management and hormones, I have a team. And my team is way more valuable and more important for my clients than I am, because I have a team working with them on nutrition and on gut health and on sleep and on proper supplementation, all the testing and putting all those pieces together. And you need to program it together to really get those results. And I want to emphasize for anyone out there, testosterone is so important, and there's so much more you need to be doing as well. And I'm so glad that we're tying all this together like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And people also need to understand that testosterone is a hormone that your body makes, and it's a really powerful compound.
Yeah.
You can't take it lightly. If you're going to be on testosterone therapy, it has to include the full lifestyle change.
That's right.
And that's why I love what you're doing with testing all the biomarkers and tying in the nutritionist, the exercise therapy, all gut health. You mentioned a few times. I mean, that's so important. No one talks about gut health when they're talking about their hormones. And so it has to be the full solution. So someone comes to you, you got them into your program, they're on the program now, right? So how do you start managing their testosterone? What are the different options available?
Sure. So when it comes to T, there are three main options we think about. First is injectable, second is topical, and third is pellets, right? And I typically recommend in that order. Injectable is what I would typically recommend as a starting point for men when they start testosterone replacement therapy. And you can do sub-Q, which is tiny little 30 gauge needle, you barely feel it, and that could be just under the skin, so super easy. Or you can use a big fat needle that goes into the muscle. Two different ways of injecting.
Got it. So let's go into the nitty gritty of this a little bit more. So there's also another method, which is clomiphene treatment, and clomiphene, right?
Right.
Which is a pill that you can take that stimulates your natural secretion of testosterone. Where does that fall into your treatment algorithm? If you don't mind talking about that one a little
absolutely.
bit. Yeah.
So when we think about testosterone therapy, you can either give testosterone, which we're talking about with, again, injectable, topical, or pellets. For some men, especially younger men, let's say he's 30, 35, 40, and he still wants to have children, for example, giving medications that can stimulate your body to make more testosterone may be a great option. So you mentioned clomiphene. I find for some men, they have issues with mood from clomiphene, mood disorders. Mood can be impacted. So N-clomiphene, a variant of it, is another form of doing that. What you're doing with clomiphene is you're telling the brain there's not enough hormones floating around, make more. And that increases LH, which is a hormone made by the brain, pituitary, that goes down to the testicles and says, make more testosterone. And so the point of clomiphene and clomiphene is to stimulate the body to make more.
Got it.
We'll often pair that with HCG, which is an injectable hormone. It's actually just like the HCG you think of in women who are pregnant. HCG works just like LH from the brain. And again, it tells the testicles to make more testosterone. So that's an alternative. I find that much more effective for younger men, especially if you don't want to give them testosterone, you want to preserve fertility. That's a great option for them.
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the problems with using that for someone who's maybe in their 50s is you just can't get the boost that you need.
That's right.
You kind of max out because your testosterone production over time actually decreases as well.
That's right.
The capacity to make testosterone.
Yes, exactly right. And I find most men over the age of 50 or so, the clomiphene and clomiphene HCG option of stimulating your body to make more is just not nearly enough, not nearly as effective as we want. And so typically TRT replacement therapy is where I would generally steer those guys toward.
Yeah. And with the TRT now, so I also recommend the injectable quite frequently. I find people love the sub-Q for the most part. There's some people that are just grown up with intramuscular testosterone,
Sure.
so they're fine with it. But with the subcutaneous one, just really diving in, how many times a week do you normally have them
Great
inject?
question. Yeah.
And what are the dosages, and where in their body do you have them inject?
Oh, great question.
Yeah.
So ideally, it'd be every day, right? If we think about physiologic testosterone levels, the more often you inject, you'll have tighter regulated levels. And so ideally, optimally, it'd be every day. No one's going to do that unless you're a bodybuilder, unless you're an insane biohacker who has no other responsibilities during your day. So for most men, to answer the question, typically 2 or 3 times a week is ideal, and it depends on compliance. So if you can do it 3 times a week, awesome. If compliance may be a problem, typically, and that's the case for most guys, twice a week is where I would direct them. Once a week is just not often enough. And this goes back to my urology days where we were doing it every 2 weeks. And now, I learned through my 10 years of going back to school and training that that's just the wrong way to do it, because you have these big peaks and valleys throughout that time period. And you want consistent levels, and you can't get that unless you're doing it at least 2 to 3 times a week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the pellet therapy, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because that's also one of my favorite ways of doing it. I myself use pellets, so I like it. It fits more with my lifestyle, because
Sure.
for me, I forget to inject. I'm running around, traveling a lot. It's hard for me to carry
Sure.
this stuff with you, especially internationally sometimes.
Yes.
You
Yes.
can't bring it international. So let's talk about pellets. What are
Sure.
your thoughts on pellets?
Sure. So for the listener, pellets are little tiny, they look like rabbit food, right? And we make a small puncture in the lower back or buttock, and you numb it up so they don't even really feel it. You make a small puncture, and with a little metal trocar, we can insert these pellets to slowly dissolve over time. And I compare it to Depo-Provera in women, right? How it's a long-term treatment for testosterone replacement therapy that can last as long as 4 months or so for some men. And so the beauty of it is it helps with compliance if you're traveling and if you're likely to forget. I actually have an alarm on my phone to remind me the twice a week that I do it so that I don't forget, because it's easy, to get lost in your daily life. And so pellets are a great long-term way to maintain optimal levels. What I find for a lot of men when they're first starting testosterone replacement therapy is pellets can be a challenge because we don't yet know your body's needs. How much testosterone do you need? And so starting with injectable or topical for a while until we get to know you and understand what your body needs, and then we can start to dial it in with pellets.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like doing it that way. There's some newer oral testosterones available now.
Yep.
Oral testosterone in the past was not used because it was metabolized in the liver. It could cause liver injury. These are some newer forms that are not metabolized that way. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so this is an interesting development that we've always, shunned the orals for the liver toxicity problems. Now that has been solved, the orals is an option. The problems with it are, number one, is run through big pharma. It's run through the insurance companies, and so you got to battle all the copay deductible nonsense, the prior authorization nonsense that is a big challenge on the administrative side. But the real problem with it comes down to levels. And what I find is with the orals, it's very tough to get the levels as high as you want them. Again, the reference range on the lab slip is what most doctors are aiming for. And sure, you can get to that level with the orals, but again, that's not where you want to be. You want to be optimized. You want to be at, to achieve peak performance, free T of around 20 is our target. And I cannot get you to that level with the orals. Even if you're doing, some guys are doing like 3 or 4 capsules a day over time. You just can't get there.
Yeah, and I find like it's so variable with the orals, like how much it's going to go up from person to person. It has a lot to do with your gut health, your absorption of it as well, whether you took it with food or not. It's just so inconsistent. And like you said, like you need that consistency with your testosterone levels. So the more often you can inject it in a week is better, or the pellets could give you a consistent level. One other topic, bioidentical testosterone versus the chemically manufactured testosterone.
Yeah, so the term bioidentical, it came from the women's health world, right? So we know that for women's health, for estrogen, we know that synthetic estrogen and synthetic progesterone are massively night and day different than bioidentical true estradiol and true progesterone. So the term bioidentical came from the women's health world, where you want the hormone to be the exact hormone in your body. When we use things like testosterone cypionate, testosterone propionate, or these other forms of testosterone that we're using, I want to be clear that is bioidentical in the fact that it is the same testosterone molecule that our body has. It's just a buffer that it's attached to, and it's a way to regulate the release of that testosterone. How long, the half-life we talk about, which is how long does that testosterone last in your body before you need more. And so for practical purposes, they're all bioidentical in the fact that it is the same testosterone molecule as the one your body makes.
Right. Right. Got it. Now, with testosterone therapy, you've started it. Can you talk a little bit about your protocol for how often do you want to check labs afterwards? Yeah. And I think every doctor has a different way of doing this. Sure. I like to check in more frequently up front, but then I back off because most people, once you get them into a level. Sure. But then again, I also find that like after travel or after a stressful event in life, things get kind of out of whack too. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so in the beginning, when you first start testosterone replacement therapy, it's very important that you're checking levels often. And I know that
often is like how often?
Yeah, as in like 6 to 8 weeks after they first start, I'll check the first level. And I'll probably do it again another 6 to 8 weeks. A lot of guys out there, they're getting tested every 6 months. It's just not enough. You're missing a lot of variation that happens, and dosing needs to be adjusted. This is, again, the personalization that is so important when it comes to testosterone. To get that stable, steady level, you need to be checking and testing and tweaking and fine-tuning. Things like, body fat. Again, testosterone gets converted into estrogen in our body fat. As body fat levels change, that conversion can change. As stress changes, it can affect it. Gut health. All these things can affect our body's absorption and testosterone levels, and that's why you got to constantly fine-tune it.
Yeah, so 6 to 8 weeks after you started, then another 6 to 8 weeks, and then what about once you have them kind of stabilized? How often are you checking?
Yeah, so if levels are where we want them to be and they're consistent, you could probably then back off to maybe every 3 to 6 months at that point. But typically I find for men, that takes 6 months to a year to get there. Yeah. It's not a quick process to find that optimal dosing. And there's constant refinement that's needed. And again, we take a very holistic approach when it comes to men's health optimization. And when you're putting all these other inputs into the system, things are changing. And your requirements for testosterone are going to change as well. And so it's so important that we're continually, I like to say test, fix, repeat, fix, repeat, and continually optimize instead of just staying stagnant and complacent with where you are.